take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thank you for showing up. Anyone here for the first time? Those who are here for the first time, what brings you here? Anybody who wants to share? You're in the front, so go for it.
I feel like I've done some of these practices just kind of on my own, and then my partner decided to bring me here, and I'm excited to try it out.
Nice. Well, welcome. Glad you're here. Anybody else first time want to share why? Yeah.
It's for the friends first time welcoming, and also I just want to try something new.
Nice. Good. Welcome. Yeah, in the back. Say again? Seeking serenity. You think you're going to find it here? Anyone else in here found serenity?
Occasionally.
You should leave now, man. I'm telling you. Yeah. No, but I'm glad you're here. What else? Why show up? Those who are here for the first time, maybe. Anybody? There's a bunch of you this way now that I'm asking you to speak. All the hands went down, so who else? Yeah, go ahead.
We'd like to learn a little bit more about Buddhism and meditation.
Yeah, great. Anybody else want to share? Why? First time? Yeah, the whole serenity thing is, it's a challenge because it's really the reason in various ways that, various words or descriptions that most people show up here. Serenity, peace, happiness, dealing with stress, anxiety, anger, sadness, depression, whatever it might be. And so, the Buddha talked very clearly that, craving and desires is the reason that we suffer. Because we're constantly craving and desiring people and places and things to be different from how they are. But he also said that there are healthy cravings and healthy desires. And one of those would be this craving and desire to find serenity. This craving and desire to suffer less. And I often ask, not just for new people, but often I'll ask people who are here, consistently or on and off over the years, whatever it might be, why show up here? And it's always, I think, an opportunity for us to reflect on what is it that keeps bringing us back to this practice? What is it that keeps motivating us and inspiring us to just keep going? And that answer is different for everybody, but I still think it's important for each person to kind of ponder and explore. If it's your first time, to always remember what that first kind of spark was. Because very often, like many things in life, they kind of, you'll fade in and out of times that you meditate or explore Buddhism or any spiritual practice, really, for that matter. But I think it's always important to come back to what was that original reason. And if we're seeking peace, happiness, serenity, whatever it might be, that means we're often constantly in a state of the opposite of that. And the Buddha called this dukkha, of suffering, discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction. So ultimately, somewhere in your motivation and intention to continue to practice, hopefully is the recognition of, I just don't want to suffer anymore. I don't want to struggle anymore. I don't want to be miserable or sad or angry or depressed. And it doesn't mean your entire life is going to be peaceful. It's not. Your entire life is going to be filled with chaos. I hate to break it to you, Learning about Buddhism doesn't mean your entire life is all of a sudden going to stop having chaos in it. Religion, spirituality, meditation, whatever you want to call it, none of that has anything to do with chaos ceasing to exist. But what this practice is about is helping you understand how to be okay within all of the chaos, how to be okay within all of the madness, how to be okay with life as it arises, so we then can engage from a place of loving kindness and compassion. First and foremost, always towards yourself. Because for most people, that's really the hardest I've found in all the years I've been doing this, that's where people tend to struggle the most. Having that compassion and loving kindness towards themselves. Very often we can forgive other people. We can be kind towards other people. But some people haven't been able to forgive themselves for 40 years for something they've done, So, glad you're all here, whatever the reason is that you showed up. Nice to be with you all. And to those joining virtually, welcome. Glad you're here. Thanks for showing up as well. There's a chat box somewhere on your screen, so feel free to say hello if you'd like. We'll start with a meditation practice. A couple things to tell you before we begin, especially for those who are new. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is this working? Is it not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? You're just going to sit and breathe. You're not trying to stop your thoughts. You're not trying to go blank. You're not trying to think nothing. Your mind will continue to race just like it always does. I will say things periodically to remind you that you're lost in thought and bring you back to present moment. Posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, often it helps slide into the front third, pushing the stomach forward. If you're on a bench or chair, wherever you're seated, also just trying to sit up straight. Relaxing the shoulders, hands are on the knees or lap, whatever's comfortable. If you need to move during meditation, simply move. Movement doesn't make you a bad meditator, it just means you need to move. I'll guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. Starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath, expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Letting go of expectations, letting go of judgment from your practice, just sitting, breathing. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. Learning to be comfortable in stillness, in quiet, wanting nothing but to sit and breathe. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. And no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And when ready, slowly open the eyes. Slowly beginning to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize how you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment. Has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how you sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around you or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in or where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens. More reactions. That's it. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to every other 20-minute period of your day. And so all we're working on is closing the gap to where the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not an easy practice. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. It is direct perception into the present moment. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the present moment is often filled with conflict, chaos, difficulties, challenges. So it's learning to be with life as it arises. If your life is a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess, meditation doesn't fix that. It helps you become aware of why your life is a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess so you can then make changes in your life. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's just sitting, breathing, learning to be kind to yourself and everybody you encounter every moment of your life. It's learning to be mindful of your karma. Karma is action. It's not what you get, it's what you give. Learning to be mindful of your thoughts and words and actions. This is your karma. Once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everything around us, wishing they would do this, wishing they would do that, hoping they do this, hoping they do that, we spend so much time focused on the actions of others. This practice isn't that. This practice is taking care of your mind and your heart. So when you do engage in the world, to create the world a little kinder, gentler place than it is, when you go into that, Buddhism, we call it engaged Buddhism, to engage in the world, but to engage in the world not from a place of anger and hatred and disgust, from a place of loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom. Engage from that place at all times. Too often through our lives we want to point fingers at what everybody else is doing, and I'm not saying what the world is doing is safe or healthy. It never has been, it probably never will be. But this practice isn't about what everybody else is doing. This practice is about what you're doing. And that's why most people are afraid of it. Because all Buddhist practice is a mirror, reflecting back on you. Everything you'll ever learn about Buddhism comes back to looking in the mirror and helping you understand, as I said earlier, your karma, your thoughts, your words, your actions, and the intention behind them. Is the intention behind all of your actions filled with greed, anger, and ignorance, which, as the Buddha said, is the root cause of our suffering, our greed, our anger, and ignorance? Or is the intention of all of our actions filled with generosity, compassion, and wisdom, as the Buddha said, is the way to overcome greed, anger, ignorance? So that's all we practice every moment. How generous, compassionate, and wise we can be in every situation. That, in essence, is what the Buddha taught for 45 years. They say he taught the same thing for 45 years, but presented it 84,000 different ways, which to me is really a metaphor for the fact that things hit us differently. So with that, I'll pause. For me, really just prefer to respond to questions. Meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with. To those who are joining virtually, again, welcome. Glad you're here. Feel free to say hello in the chat box as you are. If you have any questions, you can put them there, and I'll do my best to respond. So we'll use the rest of our brief time this evening for questions. Yeah.
So, I'm the owner of my karma. If I perform wholesome deeds with good intent, then that's going to have a benefit to my life and the people around me.
Maybe.
Well, we'll work on that. And obviously the opposite for unwholesome deeds with intent.
Maybe.
Or more likely. So I'm the owner of all that. What is the difference between that and merit, which we can at the end of the food distribution, we transfer the merit accumulated in this to those we serve. How is that different?
Yeah. So let me just kind of put it into context for those who might be new, and also to paraphrase for those virtually maybe didn't hear your question. But I'll start by saying this before I forget. You're really talking about two completely separate things. I mean, that's how they're different. They're two separate things. But what I share hopefully will tie it together and make sense. And I'll also address why I so rudely interrupted you twice to say maybe, because even in your perception of that, it sounds as if you're assuming that if I do good, that means good things will be created. Not always true. I know your fingers are crossed and you're hoping. And yes, maybe more likely that if I come up and hug you, there's a greater chance of you hugging me than you punching me. But maybe you hate hugs. Maybe you've been harmed. Maybe you have trauma and the hugging you could terrify you. So we don't always know. I guess I'll start with that now before I even get to the backing up. We don't always know. And I think it's always important to understand, especially kind of to the depth and level that you're really exploring this, which is, to me, a really beautiful way to explore it. But keep in mind that with our actions of loving kindness and good deeds, that we bring into the world versus what would be the opposite of that, the practice is to drop the attachment to, again, this isn't addressing your question, but I want to drive this home. The practice is to drop the attachment to any outcome whatsoever coming from those actions. So the bodhisattva means enlightened being, the bodhisattva practice around generosity is to give, right? And you can relate this to your karma, giving kind thoughts, good words, good actions, to give without any notion of the gift, any notion of the giver, and any notion of the receiver. Because ultimately what you're really getting at is this attachment to the sense of self that says, even in the way you phrase the question, I am the owner, as if there's an I. It's not yours. Now I've just confused you more, which is great. But that's a good place to start, right? My master always said, when you ask questions, don't look for answers, just change the way you ask questions. So dig a little more, and I'm not going to get too much into it right now because I want to come back to your question, but even in the way you phrase, I am the owner of my karma. Where's the I? What is there to own? They're not yours. So okay, I'm going to leave that at that. You can ponder that for like the next 6 months, But back to the question about karma. So as I said, karma literally means, I didn't say this yet, but karma literally means action. It's not what goes around comes around. It's this Western way of twisting karma and ruining it. It makes it sound like what goes around comes around, but we all know that we've done good and had bad things happen. We've done bad and had good things happen. So karma is not what goes around comes around. Karma is what we bring into the world through 3 ways: body, speech, mind. What we think, and this is the nature of your question, what we think, what we say, and what we do. What we bring into the world. If you're playing pool and you hit the cue ball, the white ball into the rack, every time that cue ball hits the rack, it goes into, all the balls go in a different direction. Our entire life, we are that cue ball. So every person, place, or thing that we encounter, we leave an imprint on that, right? So with that being the case with our karma, to your point, yes, and I understand, I think, the intention of your question when you say, I am the owner of my karma. What I'm really hearing you say ultimately is that you're responsible for the creation of what you bring into the world. Kind thoughts, kind words, kind actions, right? Think thoughts, speak good words, do good deeds. They should put that on a t-shirt. The idea is that that's what we're bringing into the world, is that karma. So your question now is then, how is that different from at the end of when we do the food distribution downtown, or at the end of every class I lead for me also, and many things here, we do a transfer of merit. Where that comes from is that various schools of Buddhism will teach it differently. But for me personally, in a Taiwanese-based Buddhist practice, known as the Pure Land practice, mixed with Chan, which is Zen Buddhism, and the lineage was founded by a Chinese master who went from China to Taiwan in 1949. He was 22. That practice is very much based in this teaching that you'll be, with reciting the precepts, or reciting the Buddha's name, following precepts, and meditation, that you'll be reborn into a pure land where there is no suffering. So the idea of transferring the merit is this idea that we have cultivated these beautiful actions. And yes, we'd like to think that beautiful actions will kind of have this beautiful actions coming back to us. And very often it will, right? But so as we continue to have these beautiful occurrences in our lives and we do these beautiful deeds, if we in fact do accrue any merit from that, which in this very specific Pure Land teaching you do, then you want to give that away. So it's like, you're fine. You have all the resources in the world to be able to get downtown and pass out food. You don't need any good merit from that. You got enough. But you just did a good deed. So there's kind of in this piggy bank style, this merit that's accruing. But merit is not karma. To answer your question very simply. Merit's not karma. Even specifically, for me, in the way I say it, any merit gained from this practice be transferred to all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. But that's merit. Accrued, not karma. Received.
So if karma is not mine because there is no I, who's
I told you to sit with that for 6 months. And already you're asking that. Did you even hear anything I said after that, or were you just waiting for me to shut up so you could ask that question? Go ahead, sorry.
Whose piggy bank is it then?
It's not yours, it's not mine. But now you're starting to understand it. That's why I said sit with that for 6 months. Because this idea of non-self isn't something that we hear, and you've heard it before, but it's not something like we intellectually understand. And again, for those who've never heard non-self, it doesn't mean that you don't exist. It doesn't mean you're not here, right? I mean, your mind is here, your body is here. It's all just here differently than how you perceive it to be. You have this concept of I am Jeff, or whatever your name is, and you have this body, and you have these thoughts, and you think that that's all some concrete, finite thing. These are all just all kinds of conditions coming together, the physical body coming together, consciousness coming together. I'm born, and parents or whoever is standing there saying, there's Jeff. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm Jeff. You know? And so all these kind of constructs get put into place. But yeah, definitely the whose are they, that's a lifetime of exploring. Whose are they? Not yours, not mine. There's a sutra called the Sotagama Sutra where the Buddha asked one of his disciples to find the mind. It's a long sutra. I'll save you the reading. He doesn't find it. It's not a physical, tangible thing. We think of the brain operates, but the brain is not the mind. The brain is not the consciousness. Right? So, happy to confuse you. What else? Yeah.
How important are the translations of texts? Is there anything that's lost in certain translations?
Yeah, so the question is, how important is the translation of texts, and is there anything that's lost in translation? So to give it some historical context, and you may know this based on that question, but for anybody who doesn't know this, when the Buddha was alive, 2,500 years ago, so 500 years before Christ, it was an oral transmission, you know this part? It was an oral transmission of the teachings, meaning, again, for those who've never heard this, it wasn't like, 2,500 years ago, they're sitting there with their iPad, or iPhones recording stuff. It was all memorized. And so when the Buddha died, sometime 50 years after he died, it's debatable, and I'm not a scholar, I'm not a historian, so I don't look at it from that perspective, but I know enough to comment on this. They came together and said, in essence, that was some pretty good stuff, we should write it down. So at that time, they took, they gathered this council together, and Nanda, one of his disciples, who they say had the foremost and greatest memory, they retold what they remember the Buddha saying. And that's why most of the Buddha's sutras, the word sutra means thread, so it's like this kind of thread, this continuation of the teachings. These sutras, many of them start out with, thus have I heard, at such and such time, at such and such place, the Buddha once said. So from the very beginning, now Nirmal, a dear friend of mine, many of you know Nirmal here, and I wouldn't say we debate this, but we always, he's, very, for him, growing up in the Jain tradition and very familiar with the Hindu Vedic teachings, he's, and many scholars will say that their transmission via memory is like exact. They'll say they're spot on, right? When they wrote them down on palm leaves at that time, they say that translations are, pretty direct. Now, then, right? So the Buddha, often people say that the Buddha spoke Pali or Sanskrit, But the Buddha was actually born in a kind of a village in a town called Magadan. And so whatever he spoke was a local dialect of that, which wasn't Pali or Sanskrit, but it was written down in Pali. Then you have translations that spread for 2,500 years, right? Eventually into Chinese. That became a huge spreading from there. You have Japanese, and you get them into English. So you have multiple languages that it's gone through. The old school telephone game, we could play that in here for 5 minutes, and it would end up, we'd start out with orange, and we'd end up with like bicycle, So there are going to be absolutely variations and different translations. I mean, you could have 5 translators translating the exact same thing, and they're going to say completely different things. You can have modern day people like, before he passed, Thich Nhat Hanh, who's an incredible teacher, Dalai Lama, Pema Chodron, all these wonderful modern day people. All they're doing is looking at the original Buddhist teachings, Pali Canon and then Mahayana Sutras, and they're just adding to it with their own interpretation of it. Ultimately, I always default on, I don't care if it came out of the Buddha's mouth or Donald Duck's. If it brings kindness and compassion into your life and the life of those around you, that's good enough for me. And also, one of my favorite expressions around Buddhism is, don't try to be like the Buddha, right? You're not trying to become him. You're working on what was he after. What he was after was to end his suffering. Right? We get, especially in kind of Western religious ways, that we're trying to follow the word of somebody or be like somebody or live in the image of somebody. We're not trying to live like the Buddha. I mean, any of you plan on shaving your heads, putting on robes, eating 1 meal a day, and roaming around barefoot all day long? In India? Or anywhere for that matter? No. So we're not trying to follow his life. We're not trying to become him at all. We're looking at what was he after. What he was after was, how do we suffer less? I don't even look at ending suffering because I'm convinced I'm not ending my suffering anytime soon. I think my practice very much has become, for quite a while, can I suffer less today than I did yesterday? And I say that all the time. That's what I'm after. That's my craving and desire, is can I have conditions in my life with my thoughts and words and actions that I suffer less today than I did yesterday? I'm not trying to end suffering. When you're new to Buddhism and you read like, life is suffering and there's the end of it, often all of a sudden what do is this very Western mind, okay, boom, I got to end my suffering. And then you do this stuff for 3 months and you're like, wait, I'm still suffering. That stuff doesn't work. I hate to break it to you. The Buddha didn't cause your suffering, and the Buddha isn't going to end your suffering. Who caused your suffering? You did. Who's going to end your suffering? You are. But as you all heard a sneak peek tonight, there is no you anyways, so you're good. I know, you're sitting there, right? That's the ultimate question. Whose suffering is it? It's not yours. So therefore, yeah. Just some thoughts on that. Yeah. What else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I do substitute teaching and also teach art classes at community colleges. Do you have any advice about sharing meditation techniques with students, maybe rowdy classroom 7-4 or something
Yeah. I mean, I think, and the question was around it was high school, college.
Well, as a substitute, I do
high school. What age?
K through 12.
Okay.
Adults.
So your question is around how to share meditation with students. I mean, and I started doing that in 2007, right? So schools, prisons, hospitals, cancer clinics, victims of abuse, military population, veterans, you name it. What I can tell you is, from a meditation standpoint, going into a public sector, the last thing you want to do is bring up Buddhism. You don't need to rock your mala beads. You're not trying to talk about your journey to India. You're looking at meditation from a very secular approach of dealing with stress and anxiety. And my suggestion is to really just encourage them to explore it on their own. But really trying to integrate it into the classroom and things like that, you're just going to get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, I remember at one school there was a 4th grade teacher who would have the kids meditate.
Yeah. I mean, you could have them close their eyes and take deep breaths for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's it. But, as a substitute, you're trying to get that in, I'd say keep your substitute job. And I've been in that world a long time, so yeah. Just tell them, hey, why don't you Google meditation, and maybe it'll help you deal with some anger. I wish somebody taught this to me when I was 15.
Right.
So I get it. I'm not saying it's not there. I mean, I've been in that world a very long time.
Yeah.
And my suggestion is just plant the seed. Hey, you should check out some meditation, and Google it.
Right.
And then you kind of just back away. Yeah. Don't tell them to come here. What else? Because then you're the weird teacher trying to make the kids all Buddhist and, Yeah. What else? Yeah.
What is the significance of the 3 sets of tusks on each side of the elephant's face?
Yeah. So the 6 total, the 3 sets, right, on each side. So this is what's called Bodhisattva, an enlightened being. His name is Samantabhadra. He is a Bodhisattva that represents great effort or great diligence. In Buddhism, and this specifically is the 6 tusks, but Samantabhadra in general, the Paramitas, which translates to perfection, this Bodhisattva practice or path, the idea is that you work to end your suffering, right? And you get, say, across the river and you get to the other shore and your suffering has ceased to exist, as an example, but all of a sudden you turn around and what's behind you? A bunch of people are still suffering. So the Bodhisattva vow, forget about rebirth or reincarnation, all that kind of stuff, but the Bodhisattva vow is literally to be reborn life after life, to liberate all sentient beings from suffering. So for most Western people who can't even embrace or comprehend the concept of rebirth or reincarnation or continuation of consciousness, just think about it as a day-to-day action. Ultimately, it's moment to moment. But think about if you woke up tomorrow and your 100% motivation for living tomorrow was to make sure all beings are free from suffering. How incredible would that be? Including yourself. And then you go through tomorrow and you make sure that, what's your name? Joanne, that your focus tomorrow is making sure you do whatever you can humanly possible to minimize the suffering for Joanne and everyone in the world. And you do that all day tomorrow without destroying yourself. And then you go to sleep at night and you wake up the next day and you repeat. That is the Bodhisattva vow. And so these 3 statues, these are Bodhisattvas. The path to do that is called the Paramitas, perfections of generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, and wisdom. Most people come into Buddhism to learn about what very often? Meditation. You know where meditation is on that list? Towards the end. The Eightfold Path, which is the path to ending suffering as taught by the Buddha, the 4 Noble Truths, suffering, the cause of suffering, greed, anger, ignorance, the ending of suffering, and the path, the Eightfold Path. Views, thought, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. They're at the end. Most people just want to meditate, but if you're, I think he's got his 6-year-old back there, so I'm watching my language, but if you're a pissed off, angry person, all the meditation in the world isn't going to help you. I mean, it'll calm you down for a few moments, but you have to explore, why am I a pissed off, angry person? Right? An angry person who meditates is just an angry meditator. Believe me, it's what drove me to this practice from the beginning, was anger. So I know that. I mean, real life, like I'm just full of anger and hatred and rage when I was a teenager. So the practice of generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, which is meditation, and wisdom, that's represented in the 6 tusks. The 6 tusks are the Paramitas. Yeah. And overall, he represents great effort, great diligence, because a Zen Master Dogen who lived from 1200 to 1253, he would say practice, meaning practice loving kindness, compassion, joy, all these things, as if your hair was on fire. If your hair was on fire, would you sit there and just let it burn? You'd be looking pretty quickly to put that out. And so he was using that to kind of highlight the fact that we're struggling, we're suffering. And we're like, yeah, I'm just going to work on my suffering once a week for an hour. If I just come Tuesday nights once a week for an hour, I should end my suffering, sometime soon, I'm sure. And I don't mean come here all the time. I just mean work on these teachings, work on this practice, become aware of your greed and your anger and ignorance, not just Tuesdays at 7 o'clock. By 10 o'clock tomorrow night, and I'm being kind, probably by 10 o'clock tonight, most of us will have been filled with greed and anger and ignorance over the next couple hours. Work on that. Explore that. Sit with that. Look at that. And that's why I talk about Buddhism being a mirror. Look at that honestly. Where's my greed? Where's my anger? Where's my ignorance? If we can cut through that, then we suffer less. What else? Yeah.
cracks me up because I was driving today, and sometimes now I'm getting better at it. Well, I'll catch myself, getting upset, getting mad, or whatever, and then I can reel it back in because I can come. But today, at one point, I got to that point, and then I realized I was doing it, and then I said, "The hell with it! I'm doing it anyways." And I made the conscious decision to get mad instead of retreating back.
Hey, that's progress, Yeah, I mean, right?
Yeah.
Are you proud of yourself for doing that?
I'm still decided to go the other way.
Yeah, but that's great. I mean, you saw it and you just fully owned it, and now now you've repented, so you're good to go. It reminds me of a funny story. I haven't told this one in a while, but years ago there was this kid Cole. He was a 20-year-old student at San Diego State, and I was doing meditation at KPBS every week, once a week, and he'd been there for about 3 weeks. And so like 3-4 weeks in, he comes up to me before we started, and he said, "Jeff, I think I figured out how this meditation stuff can help me." And I said, "How's that?" He said, "Well, I was at a party Friday night, and this guy was sitting on my girlfriend, and I got really angry. And I realized I was, going to get into a fight, and I should probably take some deep breaths and walk away." I said, "That's wonderful. What happened?" He said, "I punched him." And I looked at him and I said, "Congratulations." He's like, "Congratulations, I got into a fight." I said, "Yeah, but you realized in that moment there was another choice. He didn't act on it, just like you didn't act on it today, but you realized it. And 4 weeks earlier, he never would have thought there was another option, and however long ago, you would have never thought, like, there's another choice here." And for many of us, with where we're at in our lives, just that simple recognition of, I don't have to act on this thought. That alone is mind-blowing. And for many people, it's really hard to realize that every single thought you have does not have to become a 3-hour story in your head. Every thought of anger doesn't have to become you yelling at somebody. Every thought of something that made you sad doesn't have to be 6 weeks of depression. It can just be passing thoughts like clouds flying through. But we have to look at them and see, in Buddhism we call it impermanence, the impermanence of them. There are things in your past that at some point in time you were really angry at, and you're not angry at them anymore. Imagine that. There's things that haven't even happened yet that you're going to be furious over. That's just life. And there's also things that have happened in the past that were wonderful and beautiful. And in the future will be more of the same. So impermanence tells us that our life is just going to be an endless moment-to-moment experience of things happening and how we choose to respond to them. That's really where this practice comes into play. What else? Yeah.
You spoke to secular meditation. I'm wondering if the practice of Buddhism requires faith.
Yeah, so the question for those who didn't hear it was, you said, I spoke to secular Buddhism, and you're wondering if the practice of Buddhism requires faith. In the simplest answer, and I never give simple answers, in case you haven't figured that out by now, no. What are you having faith in? I'm going to follow up with something that completely contradicts what I'm saying right now, but let me start with this. What is there to have faith in, to your question, right? The question of, does Buddhism require faith? You're not taking faith in the Buddha. He died 2,500 years ago. He was just a dude. He was a prince. Left the home when he was 29, left the palace when he was 29. He became called the Buddha. His name was Siddhartha. They called him the Awakened One. He was 35 years old, and he roamed around and taught for 45 years. He died when he was 80. So if you're looking to have faith in him to save you, fix you, heal you, or help you, man, that's the wrong thing to have faith in, because he's gone, right? The Buddha was asked 14 questions, and again, comment even to my comment earlier about rebirth, reincarnation. At the time of the Buddha, when he was alive, they, as Hindus, believed in gods and goddesses, endless gods and goddesses. And there were 14 questions he was asked that he wouldn't answer. And one of them was around, should we have a belief in gods and goddesses, right? So Buddhism doesn't exist at the time of the Buddha, really, early on. It was just some dude talking, some dude teaching, some dude living. That's all he was. And then it became what we now know as Buddhism, as it spread. But he said, if you believe in gods and goddesses, you do. If you don't, you don't. That's up to you. He said, I'm not a god, I'm just a human, and I'm not here to teach you about gods and goddesses, nor whether you should believe in them. I'm here to teach you a simple, kind, compassionate way of life. Now, fast forward that to today, even kind of to the earlier question about translations and things like that. So to me, how that translates to modern day, quick show of hands, how many of you in here are Buddhist? Not one hand goes up in the room. Right? I've been in this place every day for 18 years. I've seen probably 20 hands in 18 years. Right? The people who come here, they're not Buddhist, they're not looking to become Buddhist. They're Christian, Catholic, Muslim, Jewish, pagan, Mormon, or lack thereof. Dalai Lama was asked, does this country need more Buddhists? He said, the world has enough Buddhists, so we're good. This country needs more people who are peaceful and happy. Right? A friend of mine who's Catholic, she said that Buddhism was like a software upgrade. It actually brought her closer to her Catholic faith. And I think that was a beautiful application of Buddhist teachings. So in that regard, my master always said, actually have great doubt with these teachings. The Buddha himself said, don't believe this because I'm saying it, try it. If it works for you, great. If not, abandon it. So in that regard, there is nothing or anyone to have faith in. Does that make sense so far? Now the contradiction part is, for me as a practitioner, have great doubt, but then ultimately have faith in the teachings themselves. Which again, whether it was said by Siddhartha, or Jesus, or Donald Duck. If we have faith in the fact that if we practice, so for me as a practitioner, if I practice loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, Buddhism is called the four Brahma Viharas. If I practice the Paramitas of generosity, morality, patience, diligence, concentration, wisdom, I have faith in the fact that if I bring this into my life, there's a pretty darn good chance that my life and the life of those around me are going to be kinder and gentler. If I resort to being the 15-year-old angry asshole that I was, I have faith in the fact that that's going to create havoc, as it did for many, many years. So that's, for me, where faith comes into the practice of it. I have faith in the practice. Just like I have faith in the fact that when I go to get gas, if I put gasoline in the car's going to go. Does that make sense? Yeah. What else? We'll do one more before we close. Yeah.
I guess I have sort of a metaphysical question, but if experience is sort of the basis of our knowledge, where does the notion of reincarnation come from in Buddhism? Like,
Just about to close, if you want me to end on that. So the final part was, where does the notion of reincarnation come from? Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that very simply. So going back, India, 2,500 years ago, right? I don't think I said this part when I was talking about it. If you went up to somebody in India at that time and you told them you got one life and then you're going to heaven or hell, they would have thought you were nuts, right? Fast forward to today. Our Western culture, religious beliefs and upbringings, and you tell people you're going to have a reincarnation or rebirth or continuation of consciousness. Those are three ways they're commonly phrased in Buddhism. You tell people that today and they're like, huh? Right? You're crazy. So when the Buddha was teaching, he was teaching a completely different culture, time, and belief in religious views and in the world. What it literally is, very technical terms, is called alaya vijnana, means storehouse consciousness. So the teaching was very, very simply, right? This should clarify everything for you, was that at the moment of sperm, egg, together, alaya vijnana, which is consciousness, right, enters. And that's what brings together what we call life. And then when the physical body dies, which is a shell, the consciousness then, in Tibetan Buddhism really gets detailed and specific around this stuff. So if you're really interested in like reincarnation, I suggest looking at it from a Tibetan lens. Just Google Tibetan reincarnation. Tibetans get very detailed with it. They even say that at some point when the physical body dies, during the next 49 days, at one point on the 7th day within the 49th day, while the consciousness is in the Bardo stage, that consciousness will then be reborn, come back and enter into the body. So, same thing with different, kind of to my earlier response, different Buddhist cultures and traditions will view that and teach that and share it differently. But that's not necessarily because it's what the Buddha said. It's coming from that meshing of a local culture and way of however many thousands of years that culture had existed. So one thing I saw years ago, somebody teach, and it was also in a movie, but if you have a teacup, right, and it is tea, you shatter the cup is broken, tea is on the hand you're holding, right, on your leg, on the floor, you take a rag, rinse it, still tea. That tea is the consciousness. It just continues endless time. There's a 4th century philosopher, Nagarjuna, and he says, in essence, no beginning, no end. So consciousness has always been here. But that's why when we're born, what's your name?
JP.
JP. So JP's born and you're like, oh, I'm JP. This is my body, this is my mind, this is my merit, this is my karma, this is mine. But this is, from the Buddhist lens, technically, JP is just your shell, it's your teacup that somebody named. Consciousness has been around well before. Now it's in this physical form of JP. And when the physical body dies, consciousness will go on. Now let me close with this thought just so you don't get wrapped up in that too much. Why does that matter? Why is that important? In a practical sense. If you're angry, it will pass. If you're happy, it will pass. Each moment, ultimately, there was a master in Taiwan who taught life and death studies around this, and he said the mistake us humans make is we think that these are all separate lives. The only thing that is the consciousness. It's one endless continuation of consciousness that is broken up by these physical forms. But think about that in your day-to-day life. When you're angry, it'll pass. When you're happy, it'll pass. Each moment is a rebirth. Each moment is an opportunity to let go of all the anger and hatred and resentment you've been carrying around for 50 years, or 5 years, or 3 months, to the 6-year-old back there who was angry at his toy getting taken away, Actually, they get, you take a toy away from a baby, or, 6-year-old, they're screaming. You give it back to them, all of a sudden the world is fine. See how quickly they come out of that? So, if I never see you again, just be like a 6-year-old. I'm going to close on that. We'll join palms. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. All right, before y'all head out, our Dharma Bum host Morgan has some announcements for us.
Hello everyone, my name is Morgan and I am tonight's host. We opened the Dharma Bum Temple 18 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, or teachers, and they are not looking for students. They are simply practitioners sharing their interpretation of the practice. Every night we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone with addiction problems, and our food redistribution program meets every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. We have classes and programs every day, and everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website and posted in the entryway above the shoe rack. We have a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it and then bring it back whenever you are done. Please straighten your seat or cushion before you head out. If a few people could stay to close and latch the windows, that would be helpful. Thank you for being here. We wish you well, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you all.